We're getting down to it. Less than a week remaining until the start of the NFL season. Still plenty of time, though, to get those final fantasy drafts in. I'm going to give you 3 players I am staying away from in the first few rounds of fantasy drafts this season. Some guys who I've had to change my opinion on as we get closer to week 1. All right, number 1 on the list, Achane of the Miami Dolphins. Now, we did get some good news this week on Achane. Dolphins GM indicated that he expects Achane to be out there for week 1. That's all well and good. He's still coming back from a calf injury. It's somebody who's only been in the league for a couple of years. He was injured for much of his rookie season, did stay healthy last year, but I'm not sure I'm willing to just pencil him in for 15, 16, 17 games. I still do worry about that calf being an issue for Achane, especially with the workload he will likely be tasked with in Miami. Now, we are getting a discount on Achane relative to, say, a month ago. He moved from kind of that 1-2 turn to mostly the mid-second round, if not even later in some leagues. Again, concerns over the injury, concerns over just the Dolphins offense in general. You not only worry about Achane, you worry about Tua staying healthy, the wide receivers, whether or not they'll be locked in. I prefer to go wide receiver over Achane if I'm picking at the 1-2 turn. You know, if he's still on the board a little bit later, maybe you think about it, but I'm taking Derrick Henry over him. And honestly, Chase Brown, Jonathan Taylor, Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs, maybe in a best case scenario, they don't have the same level of upside as Achane, especially in full PPR, but all of those guys to me comparable in terms of upside and much safer options, guys who will be depended on within their respective offenses. You know, you look at Chase Brown, you look at Bucky Irving specifically, they're going to catch a ton of passes. I just feel better about the outlook for those two players. So again, upside wise, if that's what you're shooting for, if you're playing in an overall contest, I get it with Achane, but just some bad vibes coming out of Miami right now. All right, before we get to the next 2 players on our list, you see it right there on your screen. Put in that code YouTube15. Put it in at rotowire.com, 15% off any of our subscription products. Gets you access to our draft app, gets you access to all of our rankings, depth charts, sleepers, injury news, you name it. Anything you need to dominate your leagues this season. YouTube15. Put it in at rotowire.com. All right, next on the list, Garret Wilson of the New York Jets. So we haven't seen a massive fall for Garret Wilson in terms of ADP, but I feel like the more people I talk to over these last couple of weeks, there's just kind of this malaise going on about the Jets offense. And I get it. You know, the Jets passing game has looked terrible in the preseason, got to the point where they had a players only practice, something I never heard of before at the end of training camp. And look, I still like Justin Fields as a fantasy quarterback, but there's a big difference between being a viable fantasy quarterback and a decent real life quarterback. So if I'm looking for a receiver in that Garret Wilson zone around pick 30, I'm taking Jackson Smith-Njigba over him. I'm probably taking T. Higgins over Garret Wilson as well. You know, you go a little bit deeper, Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Garret Wilson. That one's really tough for me. But you also have running back options in that range. Could be Kyren Williams, James Cook, maybe even Travion Henderson if you want to reach for him. If you're an early quarterback guy, that could be another pivot. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts. Usually at least 2 or 3 of those quarterbacks are still on the board, so that also becomes an appealing pivot. For me, it just comes down to, like, I love Garret Wilson, the player. I'm just not sure the Jets are going to score enough points. I think this is going to have to be a really run-heavy team with Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, and of course, Justin Fields running the ball, especially in the red zone. Do they really trust Justin Fields to be whipping the ball around? I don't know that there's a ton of touchdown potential for Garret Wilson. I mean, he is the only show in town when it comes to pass catching for the Jets. I think he'll still be a solid fantasy asset, but I'm just not sure there's much of a ceiling for him given the Jets offense, given the quarterback situation, especially when you compare that ceiling to what T. Higgins could do in Cincinnati or what JSN could do as the man in Seattle. Speaking of the Seattle Seahawks, one more player to get to, Kenneth Walker. Now, if you've listened to me on SiriusXM, if you've watched me on VSiN, you've watched our other videos here on the RotoWire YouTube channel, you know I'm not a Kenneth Walker guy. He's turned into one of the more divisive players in fantasy this season. Feels like kind of a flag plant player. You're either in or you're out. I do like the talent. I respect that we've seen flashes from Kenneth Walker, but I'm just not sure I trust him to stay healthy. We continue to hear a ton of positive things about Zach Charbonnet coming out of Seattle camp. His ADP, by the way, is up to 85 overall in the last week at the NFFC. So a lot of belief in Zach Charbonnet. You know, I'd like to have 2 running backs by the time I'm even in the Kenneth Walker range. That just takes the decision off my plate. Not always attainable, of course, but you know, if I have to make that decision, I'm happy to grab Alvin Kamara or Chuba Hubbard. You know, you're not excited about either of those guys. Even James Conner, who I'm not high on this season, I could get him a round or 2 later. Walker could certainly hit this season. New system, another new offensive coordinator. They want to run the ball. I get that. But the injury history, questions about the offensive line, how much will it really improve relative to last season? And then, of course, the presence of a really, really high-end number 2 back in Zach Charbonnet, keeping me away from Kenneth Walker.